So in the first lecture for week 2, we talked about some of the genetic contributions. And so now I want to talk about or just provide an overview of the neuroscience behind abnormal behavior. So when we think about neuroscience, we know that in the nervous system, there are several neurotransmitters and neuroendocrine activity that interact in very complex ways. And this modulates and regulates emotions and behavior and can contribute to psychological disorders when it's not working properly. So if you think about some of the psychological disorders that we will study, and I know we're just getting started, what do you believe would probably be primarily biological in its origin, just in terms of psychological disorders, if you had to think about some of the things that we know about? Just a kind of food for thought or question for thought for you to think about. So when we want to understand psychopathology from a neurotransmitter perspective or from a neuroscientific perspective, we need to be really thinking about those neurotransmitters that are most sort of implicated in psychological disorders. We think about 5 specifically: serotonin, GABA, glutamate, norepinephrine, and dopamine. Those are the 5 that we are going to sort of look at, or that are probably most implicated when we think about any of the kinds of psychological disorders that we study. So the field of cognitive science is relatively new, but it provides valuable perspective on how behavioral and cognitive influences affect learning and adaptation that each of us experience throughout life. So clearly such influences not only contribute to psychological disorders, but also may directly modify brain functioning, brain structure, and even genetic expression. So some research has examined this field by the concept of learned helplessness, social learning, prepared learning, and implicit memory. And so think about a situation, just to kind of give yourself some things to apply to this concept, where a person might develop pathological thoughts or actions based on learned helplessness. And then think about maladaptive learning or modeling. And then think about implicit memories. So ponder those concepts and think about what examples you might be able to come up with, or you might read in your chapter that give you some increased understanding of those concepts. When we think about the role that emotions play in psychopathology, emotions have a direct and dramatic impact on our functioning and plays a central role in many disorders. Mood, for example, is a persistent period of emotionality, and it's often evident in some of the disorders that we see. Moods such as fear and anger are often regarded as unhealthy. However, they are clearly adaptive functions of moods. We get fear because it's going to be protective. We may feel anger because maybe we've been slighted, and we need to have those emotions. It's just a matter of how well we handle them and manage them. But they are adaptive, even if we don't feel really great when we're having them. And so research has also illuminated the fact that some emotions have the potential to be harmful, not just mentally, but also physically. So there is a consistent finding that chronically elevated levels of anger are negatively associated with heart health, negative heart health. And we can imagine that, because when we're angry all the time, it certainly wouldn't be good for us, because we're all raised up and ramped up, and our system is on overload, and that can really have a negative impact if we're not careful. So think about some ways that anger can be expressed appropriately. I think that will be really important, and that's something that we do in our clinical work often when we're working with people where anger gets out of control and it's not managed appropriately. And so some of the things that we do from the clinical perspective is to help clients manage anger appropriately. So maybe you can think of some examples or some ways that anger can be managed appropriately. So when we think about culture and social and interpersonal factors, the existence of cultural disorders also shows us how the cultural setting is related to definitions of psychopathology, as well as the emergence of some specific illnesses, mental illnesses and other things, as well as the expression of some of the symptoms. So we need to think about those things from a cultural standpoint as well. Okay. So I think that's where I'll stop for this lecture. I know keeping lectures at about 4 or 5 minutes is probably helpful so that you view the whole thing and get what you need out of it. And so have a wonderful rest of your day.